Welcome to the Painting Insights podcast. We have been working on something in the background.
That's right. We've actually started a Patreon channel. For the last couple of months, we've had previous guests revisit the channel to give us additional content, everything from studio tours, sketchbook tours, talking us through the process of paintings and all kinds of additional treats, which you're exclusively going to see as a patron who supports the channel.
So by supporting us on Patreon, you help the channel keep going. There's a lot of work put into this, from the video editing to the sourcing of guests. So you really help us find those guests and to put the content out.
And we have lots of content planned for the near future. So the links for that will be in the description of this video and in the description on the podcast channels. And otherwise, you can go on to Patreon and type in Painting Insights Podcast and support us that way. Thanks very much. Enjoy the video. Okay, so would you mind introducing yourself for the audience, please?
Sure. Yeah, so I'm Hilary Scott, and I'm a landscape artist from Massachusetts in the US. And I started as an illustrator and evolved over the last 20 years into doing landscape paintings professionally. And it's been a long road, just a lot of different challenges that I've run into, but it's exactly where I was meant to be. So that's what I'm doing now. And it's an ongoing journey. It never stops. There's always learning. There's always something that you could do better. And that's, I think, part of why I love it so much, because I'm just constantly challenged. There's always a problem to solve. I feel like I spend my every day, pretty much every minute of my workday, just solving problems. And some of the problems are really large. Some of them I can't solve, but it's exhilarating to be able to do it, to at least to try to solve them. And then when you do solve something that's really daunting, there's just nothing like that feeling to overcome that kind of challenge.
I always think that the professional to me is not the person who gets it right the first time, but the one who knows how to steer it when it goes awry, when the painting does go wrong,
Yeah.
Yeah. So what happened with the illustration? What were you illustrating?
Okay, so back in college, my style naturally lent itself to illustration. So one of my professors I didn't know what I was really getting into. I just know that I liked to create. I was always creating something, drawing, and it just came naturally to me. So my style, the way that she saw it, she's like, you're an illustration major. Like, that's what you're doing. So I was like, okay, well, that's fine. I like doing it. I like to imagine things. I like to just create things that, just out of my head. And so that's kind of where it all started is, I would just come up with a story, or my brother writes great stories. So he would write something really silly or something just really imaginative. And then I would illustrate it, and that would be my project for college. So that's, I just had to, many semesters, it was like, just getting better at my crafts, learning how to illustrate. And it was always, I liked fantasy a lot. I liked to do fairies and creatures and trolls and just total fantastical subject matter. And imaginative landscapes, just spaces. And I loved creating lighting effects. I was just like obsessed with creating lighting effects in my work right from the beginning. It was just, I don't know, there's just something about it, lighting. I think that it moves people no matter what your subject matter is. I feel like if you're doing a still life or a landscape or a portrait, I feel like the lighting effects is really what gets people the wow factor. So that's kind of where I started. I just love to create things, and that's, it all started from there with the illustration. And that's what I did for a while. And it was all children's books. So it was children's subject matter, fantasy, a lot of figures, because there's you got to learn how to paint people when you're doing children's books, I realized. And that's kind of where I spent a lot of my focus for many years, is doing that, from like starting in probably like 1999 until when was it? 2014. It was a long time. I graduated college in 2002, right out of there, I was like, this is what I'm doing. I'm fully all in on illustration. This is all I've ever wanted to do. I just want to be an illustrator. I don't want to be a fine artist. Like, I'm not a painter. I don't want to do whatever painting, And so it was illustration for me until something changed. And there was a whole evolution that happened in that time.
It must have been a huge decision to then transition from illustration into being a landscape painter.
Yeah.
How did you make that shift?
I'll tell you how it started is that there's a skill set that you need to be an illustrator. And there are a lot of skills involved in it. You have to be able to create, a space, people, like emotions on faces. You got to get a likeness sometimes if you're trying to, it depends on the project, but but I found that I was looking around at some art exhibits, and there were some beautiful landscape paintings. A lot of them had lighting, of course. And I was intrigued by them. And I thought maybe I'll try my hand at that, or I'll try to kind of combine some of my illustrative stuff in more realistic landscapes. And so I found that the skill set that I needed to make good, successful illustrations wasn't necessarily translating into the fine art, like space. Like, it wasn't translating because I had a deficit in certain areas where it was not being read the way I wanted it to be perceived. And that's where it all started, where I thought that I had a good education from my Bachelor of Fine Arts in college. I learned a lot. But at some point you have to acknowledge that you need to take, you got to continue your education. And I was at a loss. Like, I didn't really know. You only know what you know. And so I was making these landscapes that I was really trying to make something that looked real. Like, I was trying to represent what I saw outside. And the skill set that I had was more of a fantasy one. So it was like, I created magical landscapes, and they were great for what I was doing, but they were not translating into something that was believable to the average person. And so I was frustrated. I tried and tried, and I just could not get people to see them, take them seriously. It was like, they're so nice and they look like they belong in a children's book. And it was just, that wasn't my intent at all. So it was really frustrating. And at some point along the way, I was like, my husband actually suggested it to me. And he said, you might want to consider taking a workshop with a landscape artist, because your education came from an illustration, somebody who had studied that and did that. And there's different kinds of art. If you're going to paint portraits, you get to learn from somebody who does portraits. If you want to paint landscapes, you got to learn from somebody who does that. So that's what I did. That was and then of course they say the rest is history, but trust me, it wasn't an overnight success. It was maybe a 10-year thing where I finally learned a little bit of what I'm doing. So I think, in 2014, I hit my breaking point. I was tired of being rejected from shows. I was getting tired of working for clients, honestly, like on some of these self-published books. I was getting jobs in them, but they micromanaged it. It was just time for me to paint what I felt I wanted to paint, and to just kind of take on my personal journey for art that didn't have to do with somebody else's vision. And I did. I signed up for a plein air class, and that was a wake-up call. And that's going from painting from your imagination completely and somebody else's vision to painting what you see outside. And that remains today the hardest thing that I do as an artist. Literally, the most challenging thing of anything all is taking my paint box out in the field and painting what's in front of me. I just did it the other day. It didn't come out with a good painting, but you know what? We move on. We just keep trying to get better at it. Yeah. So that's where I'm at now. Is over the 10 years, I've done a whole series of workshops, a lot of just self-reflection, trying to figure out how to take my vision, because we all have our own vision as artists, and how to just kind of create what we want and have it come out the way we envisioned it. So to bridge the gap between what we want to say and how it's being perceived by everyone else. If it's exactly how we want it to be read. And it's been quite the journey.
Yeah. Well, I have to admit, I think that when I look at your work, I always think this is an amazing, beautiful, sweeping vista. I imagine that the children's book would be far more zoomed in and you'd get a
Yeah.
lot less of the landscape. Is that true? Is that a big
Yeah. So for a book, and I learned this in college, is like when you do a storyboard, you want to try to see the book through the eyes of a child, and they want to see different angles, and they want to see, sometimes you're going to do an aerial view, sometimes you're going to zoom into something so that they can really get the detail. You zoom out, but then so you're just going to kind of create the storyboard so that you have a lot of variety in shots, like the way that it's being cropped down. So your subject might do a giant aerial view of a land, and then you're going to zoom in on the focal point, and then you're going to show the camera angle looking up and looking, it just all these different, like sometimes you'd be looking up the nostrils of a character. Like it's a totally different ball game. Like it's you want to mix it up, because it's a project, like it's a series of illustrations that makes the project. And so when this landscape that I kind of like to get I like to create a sense of space. I like to kind of this large open spaces. Some of them are a little, like the way I create the work is like, if I wanted like a little intimate space, like I'll kind of crop it down so there's a lot of trees framing it, and it just depends on what your goal is. But for me, I just kind of wanted to, there's just the places that I like to paint, they're just beautiful, large open spaces. And I just want to create that open air feel, a lot of lighting effects. And each painting is its own project. So like, unlike a book that you're doing where all the illustrations have to kind of play off one another, this is like every painting has its own freedom, and I can just make it the way I want it. And it doesn't have to fit with anything else.
Yeah. So that's a lovely sense of freedom it's offered you,
Yeah.
which you wouldn't have had beforehand. What was a big transition that you had to make in your education when it came to adjusting your knowledge and your experience from what you knew to now what you practice and kind of master?
So many things, so many things. So the first I will say is, I'm going to say the color palette needed a huge overhaul, because I love bright colors. I think children love bright colors. You can really go all in with the chroma. And well, I did know how to gray things down a little bit. Like you learn a little bit of that in school about how to use color. I did not know nearly enough as to how to create a realistic painting. So I think a lot of that was my color palette. So when I did take my classes, I had to do some real tedious work, just like mixing color swatches, learning about color theory. Again, just going back to the basics and learning how to mostly gray things down, because from somebody who was always pushing chroma, you got to pull that way back, and less is more. So in my landscapes, like I'm saying that, like, it's 90% of it's gray, like just different colorful grays, like just various chromas. And then a punch of color will go so far. And you don't realize that until you actually start executing this and realizing that, oh my God, like, before it was like 90% chroma and 10% grays. Now we're like flipping that, and it's like the effects they're mind blowing to me. I'm like, you get the tiniest drop of a high chroma color next to all these grays, and it's popping, and it's making everything look like exactly how I saw it. Because these sunsets that you see, these lighting effects, like in nature doesn't really provide with a whole lot of chroma. You feel like it's chromatic, but it's really not when you study it. And that's where the plein air painting comes into play, and the observation, going out and observing your surroundings instead of what you think in your head, which is how I operated for 20 years, really. It was fine. Like it was, I was getting paid for these illustrations. It was like, just make something up in your head and the kids will believe it. Well, guess what? Adults aren't believing that now. When I'm trying to make these landscapes, it's like there's something wrong here, and it came right from my color palette and my knowledge of color. That's exactly where I needed the work to be done. So I did that. A lot of, if I'm not even painting, if I'm not out there painting, I'm always painting in my head. So I'm always observing things, taking mental notes. At sunset, looking at like the transitions of the colors in the atmosphere, looking at what happens with the sun and how the lighting affects, you know, everything around it. And also just the trends in how the colors graduate from one another. Like it's really fascinating. And there's just so much more gray in nature than I ever wanted to believe before. So that was the first thing. That was very long-winded. And the second was obviously going out and plein air painting. So painting from life, painting what I actually see versus what what I know in my head. And that's obviously, I think everyone's going to agree on that we, I don't know, like we know that leaves are in the summer, they're green, but like when you go out, they're all different tones. Like there's all these different subtleties in things. And that is really what makes the magic of a painting, is like these subtle value shifts and color shifts. And so that's the only way you're going to get that, is when you're going to look at it with your eyes, not through a camera, not in your head, not what you imagined it to be. So there was that, observing that. And, you know, obviously just studying values, getting accurate values, there is nothing more important than that, because if you can just execute the correct value structure, you can have a successful painting in just black and white. And I think that even like seasoned artists struggle with values. There's nothing more important than that. And what else? It's been humbling. It's been a humbling experience, just trying to get, you know, to just be able to create these landscape paintings the way I wanted to. My taste is I have like impeccable taste. Like I feel like my taste is up here. And for a long time, my skills were down here. So it's been a frustrating at times kind of road for me, but we're all on this journey together. Like every artist is trying to just make their best work and just trying to push the envelope and challenge themselves, get out of their comfort zone. So it's just, you have to just accept there's going to be failures along the way.
Oh yeah.
There have been many.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, you didn't.
That's that is a healthy, that's the only way to really see it, isn't it? Is to embrace the failures in order to grow and learn from where that falls short. Now, I'm thinking, because it's massive things that obviously you've covered as far as learning color and that everything's gray. I mean, I wonder whether some of the listeners maybe, I mean, I don't really know about, I know that some very professional artists listen. We may have some beginners who don't understand what you mean by everything's gray. And I had this fantastic friend, and her painting is not too dissimilar to yours as well. And I love your work. I love her work. And
thank you.
She says exactly the same. She says it's all gray. Now, can you expand on that, just to simplify it for anyone who's listening who doesn't know what that means?
Like in a landscape, like the colors in nature, you mean, like that kind of thing?
Like tertiary terms, you know, as far as like when it comes to, you know, so it's not primary, it's not necessarily secondary. You kind of really,
so this has simplified it for, I don't know how this is if people are gonna get this, but colors can be very complicated. Like it can be really overwhelming, because there's like, just think about, there's an infinite number of hues, and like in the spectrum, like think about like just reds, like there's like, you know, there's like warm reds, cool red, like there's just a million of them. So what I took, and I don't know if this is an answer your question, but we took a Munsell color wheel. The Munsell color wheel really kind of simplifies it into like very understandable terms, where it's like color can only go in 3 directions. It can be like there's 11 hues, like it's like on the spectrum, like red, orange, yellow, yellow, green, like it's got 11 of them. So there's 11, and I made a color wheel when I took this workshop. It can go in 3 directions. Hue, chroma, and I think it's value, hue, chroma. Those are the 3. And so basically, I'll try to simplify. When you're out in nature and you see a sunset and you think it's really, really bright, there's like the paints that come out of the tubes are the brightest you can have. So when you put those and see those on your palette, and then you try to make the landscape with the colors that are out of the tube, it is going to be like neon. It's going to look unnatural, too bright. So you need to figure out through for me, it was taking a workshop, is learning how to gray down each of the colors, the 11 hues on the color wheel. So, so it does simplify it down. It can only go 3 directions, but it's just learning how to gray down your reds, to learn how to gray down the oranges and the yellows, like all of the things that you see in a sunset. They're not as bright as you think they are inside your head. Like that's where the disconnect is, where it's like in your head, you imagine a sunset to be very, very bright. And in reality, it is not. So that's why if you're going out and painting it from life and you try to paint the colors that you think they are, it's not gonna match. So you need to learn the skills on how to gray things down. And that was critical in my ability to convey a believable scene, is graying things down. Pretty much anything, like green, like just say you take the green and you want to paint some trees, some leaves, grass, and you're going to squeeze out that green on your palette. It's going to look like an illustration. Like I used to paint, like with the bright chroma. I didn't really have to utilize those skills when I was doing illustration because, everything kind of went. Like it was just it flew fine in the illustration world. But yeah, you got to learn how to grade things down. And there's different techniques in doing that. I had to make a bunch of color swatches, learn how to do it. And then that's where the magic happened. So once I learned how to gray these things down and how to manipulate the colors, so like you would gray some of this down in a sunset, but then when you have all your clouds in there and all of the elements in the sunset, and then right at the focal point, you take a hit of the brightest pink or the brightest orange, and you use just a tiny bit of that, then you're going to see why everything I just said is true. Because then it pops and then it looks real and people are like, wow, that glows. And it glows because those two things, they play off each other, the grays and the chroma. Did I answer do you think I simplified it enough?
No, I thought that's one. I mean, to be honest, I don't know about simplified, but you definitely explained it really well.
Okay, because I know.
It's
Thank
kind of,
you.
it was more expansive than I imagined you'd go, but I really appreciate that
Thank
because
you.
that explanation is going to be more comprehensive for people who don't necessarily explore the educational route through painting. So anyone who's listening, I think, will get a lot of benefit from that kind of insight. I'm wondering, do you gray things down with, because my brother uses black as well as white separately. So he'll say you can kill the chroma with black, just like you can with white. And that can still offer something where you're going to reach a tonal hue, which can be accurate and won't overpower the rest of the kind of tonal values on the surface. Is that something you try, or do you only
You know
use?
what? I don't actually. I don't own black. I don't.
Okay.
Well, I have it. I have it because when I did, I had to make the color swatches. We had to mix up like this gray, but I actually don't use black at all to gray things down. I learned in the workshop and from making the color wheel what colors will knock back the chroma on other colors. So for example, like a cool green, you're going to use like a warm red for that, like complete opposite. And so over this time, like trial and error, I figured out what color combinations are going to work for the effects that I want in a painting. So there's not like a real hack to that. It's really just, you can mix up a neutral gray. You can mix up a neutral gray with a black, white, and then like a raw umber or a burnt umber, so a little bit of a warm tone, so that it's a neutral, not so cool, because black and white is going to be a very cool tone. So you can do that and use that to dechrome, like take the chroma down on your colors. But for me, sometimes I'll use like for yellow ochre, a ultramarine blue, and that's going to take the chroma down, or even a yellow ochre with a dioxazine purple. So it's just kind of like practicing it, and then over time it becomes second nature. When you need to knock something back real quick, if you're plein air painting, you already know in your head, like based on the practice, you know immediately how to do it. But again, you can mix up a neutral gray, when that would include black, to mix into some of the colors. And I think that might be probably the quickest hack, if you will, to do it, because if you mix up a full value range of that gray, you can just take that and just mix it into whatever color you want it to be less bright. But it's going to take longer to learn what colors on the color wheel are going to adjust other ones.
Yeah.
But there's a different effect. there's a different effect. So if you're going to use a neutral gray to knock back a color, and then you put it next to the complementary mix, those two are going to be a little bit different. And I think that's kind of the magic in all this is like you can make it how you want it just through trial and error.
Yeah. I should say, just because I've mentioned my brother's kind of advice to me as far as that, he doesn't use a black as a black. He'll only use it to kind of kill the chroma. He's quite into experimentation. He does a lot of invention when it comes to changing colors and things, because he knows how to do accuracy. So he's now a big advocate for changing colors and kind of, keeping and preserving the tonal range, but then changing the hue because he likes that type of approach, which I'm really open to. So I just was curious whether you'd kind of use that, but that was really interesting as far as using the complementary color on the color wheel to kind of kill the chroma of the other one is kind of quite an interesting, obviously
Yeah.
the way to do it.
There's always there's more than one way to like get to a destination. There's it's never like just this cut and dry thing, which I guess in some ways is good, but in other ways it's not, because then people get all confused. They're like, well, then how do I do it? But there's many ways to get to even a certain hue. Like if you want to make a certain hue on your painting, like it's like I know that one person mixes up this color combination to get there, and then this person mixes, like there's different ways to get to the same destination. It's just you have to decide what works for you, like what you like, what it's nuanced like that.
Yeah, it can be overwhelming, but this makes me wonder as well, because a big thing can be how to compose a painting, because once you've got the skills of mixing color and tonal values, how do you make it sit comfortably on the picture plane? How have you learned that? Have you learned rules around that, or is it trial and error, or how do you go about that?
Do you mean like the design aspect, like how to set up like the composition of a painting, or you mean
Yeah.
like how to, yeah. So you know what? I have to say that before getting into this new just era, I guess, of landscape painting, I was very good at composition, because as an illustrator, if you're an art major in general, no matter what you're doing, the first thing they're teaching you is design. They're teaching you how to create a composition. So I already had pretty good skills at that, on how to crop something, where you might put the focal point, just like how to get movement through your painting. So I feel like I already had a pretty solid skill set in that. And, a lot of the work had to go into the color. But and boy, that's still, working on color is a lifelong thing, because it's just there's so many ways to use color, and obviously nature gives you different scenarios based on lighting, like every single day, every minute of every day, there's something different to try to like deal with the color. But yeah, the composition, and that's kind of why I like to start with the black and white, or the brunei, the brown and white, which I do a lot of that. Is all you're doing is focusing on composition and value, which are that's like the benchmarks of a successful painting. Like that's like non-negotiables. If you have to nail your values, and you have to have a good design. So I think sometimes simplifying it down to phases is helpful for people. And that's why when you take an art class, like a beginner art class, they're not going to give you color right away. They're going to give you black and white, and you're going to like sketch something in a composition, black and white, monochrome. And even though I kind of know all of them now, like I can deal with color, I can deal with composition values. I do think sometimes breaking it into steps does help to make it less overwhelming, and you can just focus on one thing at a time. So yeah, so I do. I will figure out the composition and then and the value structure. And I will say for the color part of it, before I make that black and white, I always do an experimental color study. And I think I think this is the fun part of a painting, is where like you can experiment with your ideas on the low pressure situation, because you're making a little like small, like a little study, and you can even make multiple studies. Like, it's just using the color knowledge that you have, and that what you want to say in the painting it's exciting. You can just make a color study, and then if it sucks and you don't like it, you just discard it. And then if you really like it and it really works, then you can upsize it. So, but as far as how I do color, I just I think it just depends on what I'm trying to say in the painting. And some subjects are much more challenging than others. If you are, say I'm doing a fog scene and the value structure is compressed, it's very, very challenging to make those paintings.
Mm.
Um,
I suppose
and
if I can kind of just dig into the design aspect of composition. So
sure,
if I were to point out a couple of things I notice in the picture behind you, because I love it, it's absolutely beautiful. And the
thank
two
you.
big things which I always try to look for in paintings when it comes to lovely compositions like that, which you have is the diagonals, which are really nice. Like you have this lovely diagonal in the foreground. And then the 80-20 rule, as far as you've got about 20% light and then 80% that's dark mid-tone, and it's kind of gives it that real richness and pop to the environment. Is there anything like that that you can share as anything else compositionally that you
Yes.
try to do?
It's funny you said the whole 80-20 because I actually that's subconscious because it's not something that I consciously do in a design. I'll tell you what I do consciously. So I employ the rule of thirds a lot of the time. So when you're gridding up a composition, you try, and this is not a hard and fast rule because I've seen it broken. The focal point, you don't really want it in the middle. Like you don't want major components right smack in the middle of your painting. So what I do with this is you kind of grid it into thirds. So like I don't measure it with the ruler a lot of the time. I'll eyeball it. So it will be like divided into thirds. So my focal point is up here on one of the, points where it's a third in. And then another, I guess, rule, but it doesn't always apply, is like you want to try where the thirds kind of hit, like up here, have points of interest. So your focal point is going to be at a third, and then although this doesn't really follow it, like this reflection is a little bit off of the third. But if you're going to follow that rule, it would say that that's where you put important aspects of the painting. The other thing that I do is, and probably this is the most important decision I make when I create a design, is where is the horizon line? Because as a landscape artist, that's super important based on what the point of interest is in the painting. If it's about the sky, you're going to have a lower horizon line. Or if it's about reflections, you're going to have a higher one. And in this one, I just decided obviously I was going to do higher. The sky is reflecting, but you try not to put the horizon line right through the middle. And again, disclaimer, I've seen this rule broken. If it can work, but I don't generally do it a whole lot because I find that I'm trying to create tension, and you want to try to have like asymmetries to make it an exciting composition. And diagonals are also a major component of a successful, have the movement through your painting. So you want to have, I do a lot of diagonals in my paintings. And then the other thing is we want to always make sure that we are not leading our viewer out of the painting. So if I just kind of let this go off, sometimes it brings your viewer out of the painting. So you want to try to create your composition in a way that your viewer is going to stay inside the painting and lead them through the painting to your focal point, and just keep your eyes moving around your composition. I mean, I think these are rules. These are pretty basic rules that anyone who's taking an art class is going to learn them. And then I think in terms of composition, the other thing is you want to have a combination of horizontals, verticals, and diagonals. And I think this is actually a good example because I get the trees, the verticals, I get the the horizontals are like this line of trees, and then of course I have the diagonals. Yeah. And that's, I think, in a nutshell, that's pretty comprehensive in terms of what you want to, on a basic level, accomplish in the design.
Yeah, I know that this is probably the basics, but I mean, I always try to make sure that this is provided in case there is people who are listening who just don't. If we're going over their heads, I'd hate for people to feel lost from.
No, totally. I've learned this so many times that it's like second nature.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I was going to ask you as well, because you've now ventured into the kind of reality of a landscape. Do you still invent at all? Is there any kind of invention that you still inject into your landscapes?
Yes, absolutely. So here's how this transition has gone. So I started doing complete imagination as an illustrator. Then I was like so frustrated by my lack of, forward movement in my landscapes that I decided to get rid of all of that and paint exactly what I saw. And it was a little bit boring. I did a full 180 and went from no imagination, full imagination to none. And it was just kind of like dull. So now I have learned that I can paint what's in front, like paint something that's realistic, that's going to be believable, but incorporate some imagination into it because that's what makes it exciting. And that's where the unique artist vision comes into play. Um, I think you can have a bunch of artists out and painting in a plein air landscape and paint whatever they see, and it's all going to be a little bit different because everyone has a different style. But I think what's exciting is the idea that you're not locked into exactly what was there that day. Like you can create things, you can delete things, you get rid of this and add this. It just has to be consistent within the scene. So whatever the lighting is going on, whatever is going on in the scene, you can do whatever you want with it, but you better have the knowledge and ability to kind of approach it where it's not going to be out of place. So if you're going to add some lighting effects in there, you should know where the sun is because it needs to be consistent within the scene. And I think that's the take-home message is you have an creative license. It's just that it won't be believable if you just decide you're going to arbitrarily start throwing things in. An extreme example would be like you're going to have a winter scene and have like flowers, like flowering trees in there. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like something like it's as an illustrator, I was told I would try to push the envelope on some of that sometimes. And, one of my professors was like, you can do whatever you want. You're an illustrator. You can create whatever you want, even if it's not consistent. And I kind of ran with that. But guess what? As a landscape artist, they're going to be like, this is not right. Like this doesn't work. And so it's very exciting though to be able to create something and kind of balance what is actually there and what you want to be there but wasn't actually there.
Yeah. I spoke to an example of that as I spoke to a wonderful artist not long ago, and she showed me one of her paintings and it had 3 women on there. And she said, it's the same model. And one of them I flipped in a mirror image. And she said, that means that the lighting source has changed because it was the same. She was in the same position. So it's not going to be a realistic image. It's just now a study of 3 figures, even though it's the same woman. And it was a beautiful painting. It had no background. So it was just 3 figures on the canvas, beautifully painted. But she said it's not something which you can do outside of teaching for poses in composition, but you can't do it as far as realistic light source because the shadows didn't follow the realistic light source on the figure or on the ground. So that's close to what you were saying there, really.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So if you don't mind, and you don't have to do this, is there anything on the painting behind you that you can show us that you may have invented slightly there as an example?
Yeah. You know what? I'm going to I may do this. And this is pretty accurate to what the scene was. Honestly, yeah, I'm thinking of changing these pine trees into more like to non-pine trees, I guess, like to more like flowy branches. Like I'm toying with the idea of it. I don't know. And I may change them because I did a similar scene and I changed a lot of things actually. Let me show you a scene where I changed a lot of things from what it was. It was hold on. Yeah, I did this nocturne. So this is a nocturne that I did last summer. We got the wildfires in Canada were creating this haze. Like it was a super hazy sky sunset. So anyway, these trees, this is the same scene. These trees, they were pine trees. And I got a picture of this sunset, but it wasn't over this land. So I kind of mixed and matched my photos of the composition And then I changed the trees. So I'm thinking of maybe making these trees on that, but I don't know yet if I'm going to do that. But anyway, yeah, that's kind of thing is what I do. I'll add a tree in sometimes just to kind of break up a straight line that
Mm.
might be there. I do like to play around with the composition, and optimize that. And a lot of times that involves taking things away, adding things.
Do you use previous tree paintings or paintings of trees that you've done as a reference to kind of build up that reality? Yeah.
Yes, I take a lot of pictures of trees, even if I'm out walking and I like a tree, I like a certain tree, I'll take a picture of it and I'll just like put it in my painting. And
Mm.
so if there are lighting effects in the painting, but there's not lighting effects in my photo, I'll add them in the painting. Because as I said, you have to be consistent in your painting. But a lot of times, yeah, the trees that you see, and it could be an otherwise beautiful scene, but the trees are just too straight or they're just not exciting. There's just a lot of freedom.
Mm.
And it took a while to get there. It took a lot of courage to realize that you can do that. Like you can add, you can do that. And if it doesn't work, then you have to acknowledge that too. Like sometimes what you might have in your head is something that will work, doesn't end up working. But a lot of times in the last couple of years, I've really incorporated some imagination into my paintings with great results.
Excellent.
So it's
I mean,
encouraging.
yeah, I kind of, I'm a big advocate for what you're saying as far as I think you should paint reality for a certain amount of time until you know it so well that you can then, take that confidence to invention where it needs to be. Because if you do it too early, as you said, you won't be really rendering anything realistic in texture or in tone. I don't think necessarily that will sell the painting any kind of realism. So that's why I appreciate when you're saying that, you need to know what you're doing before you start to move things around and change things.
Absolutely. And I will add this in that I didn't say earlier is that if you're going to do this and change things around, I feel like there needs to be there's a learning curve where you need to learn how to paint it as is first. So I didn't have any business playing around with these imaginary elements for a while because I needed to take a full break from all of that to learn how to paint reality as I saw it. And then after I learned to do that, then I could start to add little things back in, little by little. And so I think I'm at a good balance now because I don't want to go back over. I don't want to cross back over to where I'm making fantasy paintings.
Yeah.
And
Or it's being too rigid, because as you said earlier, it's if you're stuck with the composition that the landscape offers, then you can't make those creative decisions. So I think you're in a sweet spot at the moment where you've got a bit of both worlds, but
oh,
obviously
thank you.
more from reality. So that's the better thing. I found, and I don't know if you found this at all, with you mentioning pine trees, that's one of the few trees that I've mentioned. So that same landscape painter friend of mine, I would change the green because it's sometimes too darker green to complement the rest of the greens of the landscape. Have you found that same thing?
Yeah, I do. I manipulate the colors. I really try, especially like if you're adding lighting in, like the greens are going to be influenced by that light, so they're going to be a warmer green. But I definitely I do manipulate the colors. Sometimes I'll even add like oranges into them because it's like it's creating that illusion of depth and like like kind of planes in your painting. So like yeah, the trees that are closest to the sun, those will take on a more warmer tone. And then as you get further away from the light source, you're going to have a more cool green. You can add purples into your greens. You can add reds into your greens. Like there's so many things. So when you start out painting with beginners, a lot of times they're overwhelmed by the greens. You're just painting a landscape and it's just like all the greens are uniform. They're like, it's just too much green. But if you really take a closer look, you're going to see there's green yellows, there's green reds, there's purples mixed into the greens, there's like brownish greens, there's green greens, there's blue greens. Like there's so much variety. So even if you don't see that in front of you, just say the off chance that you're out and there's a very uniform green. I haven't seen it, but you can still manipulate the colors in your painting to kind of read the way you imagine them to be. There's just so much freedom. It's like, who's going to tell you it's not real? Like, you know what I mean? Like the person wasn't there. So as long as you kind of play it off, like you can fool people
Yeah.
by manipulating your colors the way, nature does do it, you're fine.
Yeah. They don't want a photograph, do they? They want your painting. So
We
as
don't
long
want a
as
photograph. No, and that's the thing is like that's the other thing is like, I used to copy photographs. I used to be like, oh my God, I got the perfect photograph and I would just copy it. And everyone could some people would be like, wow, it looks just like a photo you're painting and they looks like a photo. And even now, I think sometimes people think they're giving you a compliment and they're telling you that, but it couldn't be further from a compliment. Like it's like, okay, I'm not trying to create a photograph. I'm trying to create my vision and just, the poetry that I kind of want to be on this panel. And that's I think our goal as artists, to just have our unique voice that we bring something to the table. So it's not just a photograph. It's like it's a complete mixture of what we've experienced, what we want our viewer to get out of the painting. It's just a fascinating kind of venture that I love it.
I think that you do lose quite a bit with photo. If you're not aware, and this is for any listeners who aren't aware, I think photographs have a big flattening effect on a landscape that you don't get with
Yes.
air experience. And can you talk to that at all? Have you experienced that?
Oh my God, they lie. They lie horribly. What I use photographs for, compositional details, like how branch, like stuff like that, little compositional elements. But as far as if you're looking at the photographs to get your color information, especially your value information, you're going to be very disappointed. They lie horribly. So yeah, if you're going to copy the photograph. So one of the things that I learned over time and also in my workshop is like basically how you view a scene and then how the photograph will portray it. And you can learn how to correct the photograph to an extent, because a lot of times, all the values are just going to be, they're going to darken things, especially when you're painting something with a lot of light, like a sunset. It's going to wash out that whole area. So I can always tell every time if somebody paints a sunset and they copied a photograph, a really bad photograph, you can tell that it's been copied because the photograph is only going to portray it's lacking in all the information that you need to make that accurate. So I don't rely on photographs very much. I do a lot of correcting on my photos.
Yeah.
And the other thing I don't ever paint a photo. Like if I haven't seen a place, if somebody sends me a photo and they're like, oh, can you paint this? Like I have to see it first with my eyes, and then I will take a photo to use. Like photos are our tool. They can be used for certain things, as I said, but like don't use them to get your value and color information. And your mood sometimes, they're flat.
Yeah. And do you find as well that things in the foreground have more of a warmth to them and things in the background, or not like in the distance, will have that cooler hint?
Like in a photo or in real life?
In real life, it's, because if you look at the mountains in the distance, they'll become blue, or they'll have like a tint of blue. And then things as they come forward become more red.
So that depends. That is highly dependent on the light source. So I've actually found it's funny you brought that up, because before I started studying different types of lighting, I would always blue stuff down as it was receded. But if you notice, and I don't know, you can see very well in this, but some of the other paintings I posted, if there is a light, if it's a sunset and there's a warm atmosphere here, everything here further away is actually going to be warmer than things in the foreground, because your light is, the particles in the light are actually influencing all the planes of the landscape. So in a cool day where it's like, white clouds, or a cooler atmosphere, things will be cooler as you get further away because the atmosphere is cool. So it's just cooling down all of the planes that are away from you. And so of course, as you are in the foreground, things will be warmer. But it is the opposite effect when you are looking at a very warm sunset, warm atmosphere. And that was only something I learned through direct observation. And that was a game changer, because then you can paint it the way you see it if you have that knowledge and you don't paint by formula. So that was a little, I like learning
brilliant. Yeah, I think it kind of, I think that shows I've obviously got a very British experience, because the landscape's always got that cool effect
Mm-hmm.
on distance. So I think I need to travel more and
So I haven't been to England, but I have been to Ireland, and
yeah.
Ireland is definitely very cool and
Yeah.
rainy.
No, I'm in Wales, so I'm not quite England, but I'm in Wales, so it's closer to Ireland really. So yeah,
Yeah.
I think. Yeah. But there we are. That was an interesting. I've never noticed that, so I'm keen
Well,
to
no, start
travel.
noticing. Like if you see a
Yeah.
really warm sunset, and the sun is like right on the horizon, you'll see that it warms up the distant landmass,
Mm,
and it kind of creates warmth on the even on the land, like on like the ground, and that gets cooler as you. It's subtle. It's very subtle, but when you know that, you can actually your sunsets become more believable because it didn't work. Like if it was like super blue, but the sun is really warm, it there was just like, why is this not working? And that was why.
that's amazing. I love that.
Yeah,
Okay. Well, we've talked a lot about color, so if we can we go through your actual color palette that you use and talk about which
sure.
colors you have?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Where's my color palette? It's right over here.
Mm,
So, I'm gonna just grab it because it's easier.
yeah.
I don't I have a lot of colors on my palette actually. So I'll start with like generally speaking, all the hues, I have a warm and a cool tone of it. So I'll have a alizarin crimson, which is cool red. I'll have cadmium red. Then I do a vermilion, which is a coolish orange, and then cadmium orange. I think what is it? I know there's different hue. I know that I have a cadmium yellow medium,
Mm.
viridian, olive green, king's blue, cobalt blue, ultramarine blue, dioxazine purple, titanium white, of course. And then the neutrals I use are generally burnt umber, burnt sienna, and yellow ochre.
Oh wow, okay. Fantastic.
Yeah.
So you've got quite a range of earth tones in there as well as a split primary and kind of some
Yes.
extended primaries in there. And is this grown? Is this kind of, I mean, I know it's dramatically changed from your illustration days, but has this grown since your
You
re-education
know,
into fine
I'm
art?
not sure it's that different from my illustration days. It's kind of the same colors. The difference is that I don't use the colors straight out of the tube anymore. I really spend a lot of time mixing different colors together.
Mm,
And but I've always liked a lot of colors. I
yeah.
don't have like this three color palette where I like have the three colors and I can mix anything from them, which I find is amazing. I'm like, I know a lot of artists do that. I am not one of those artists. So yeah, this is what I do.
I've not come across King's Blue before. What type of a blue is that? Is that a
King's Blue is awesome. It's Williamsburg. Where's that
okay?
too? But yeah, it's the brand I use is Williamsburg, and it's great for atmosphere, like the sky, like the blue sky kind of at the bottom. And
Mm,
again, you do mix it with something, you're gonna want to put a little orange in there because it's very bright, maybe a little bit of yellow. And it's great for that lower, the value is very light on it, so it's great for that low part of the sky. And that's what I use it for. And then
mm.
the cobalt mixes nicely with that. It's once I found King's Blue, I was like, this is the best color ever. I use it in
Wow.
every single painting, pretty
Oh,
much.
brilliant. Oh, that's fantastic.
You
Now,
should try it.
yeah, I will. I mean, I'm going to ask a bit of a, this may be a question you get quite often, and I very rarely ask it, but I'm going to ask just because we've talked about photographs as reference and then plein air experience. I'm wondering how long does it take for you to finish a painting from the, say, the one behind you? I know you said you're still considering changing a couple of things, but how long will it take you to get to this point where you are at the moment?
It depends on the painting. So I feel like this kind of subject, this tonalist, low light painting is something that's a little bit more comfortable for me to do. And so this will kind of this will cruise a little bit. Like it's not like it doesn't have challenges, but I would say maybe like a few weeks to do it. And I'm not working on it every single day. I rotate paintings. I
Yeah,
rotate paintings all the time. I have like I don't know, maybe like six going on at any one time.
yeah.
So I will just decide to work on this one day. I think I may have like one more sitting on this, like one more session,
Mm,
depending on whether I decide to change the trees. But yeah, some paintings could take a year to do because I can't seem to get them right. And then some paintings I could do in a couple weeks.
Yeah.
It really depends on how difficult the subject matter is and how much information I have. Sometimes I'll run into a roadblock. Like I'll start a painting and it seems to be going fine, and then I'll just realize that I don't have enough information to like make it great. Like it can
Mhm.
be okay, like good, but it not great. And that's hard because where do you get that information? Like
Yeah.
it's
Well, it's also, it looks like you're capturing the golden hour, and that's
yes,
almost
yep.
impossible to get in person because obviously the light is disappearing fast. So how do you reconcile that kind of time of day?
So I have, out of all the things that I've observed, I think that this time of day is probably one that I've spent maybe 10 years kind of observing and taking little bits of knowledge a little bit at a time to execute it accurately. And so this, I don't do plein air. Like I generally, it's the light is moving so fast at this point that I have to go out there. I observe it with my eyes. I do take some photos and I have to use a lot of memory to get this to kind of execute this accurately. But yeah, I just feel like I've seen it so many times that I just know the colors now. Like I know them, and it's not like this is exact, like this may not be exactly what it was, but I think that through a combination of my direct observation and just kind of a little bit of imagination, like I think maybe these values are a little bit darker. So I'm trying to create like a glowing effect. It's more this probably a little lower light than it was there. And these are the kind of adjustments that we all make as artists. Is just like you want to create a glow around here, so you're going to make the rest of the painting a little bit darker than it was when you
Mm,
were observing the scene.
yeah.
And of course you want to glow everything that's around. So like, the tops of the grasses or it's everything's backlit.
Mm.
And but I think I have a pretty good handle on painting this time of day. There's plenty of subjects that are just very grueling for me. I'm trying to do a forest right now in a fog, and it's
Mm.
really kicking my butt. So yeah, it's really hard. I don't know if
Well,
I'm gonna finish it, but we'll try.
this, yeah, this the kind of tonal value on the sky then, is that part of a very subtle vignette to keep the viewer inside of the frame, as you mentioned earlier?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, like you're talking about the tones, like the values around.
Yeah, it's almost like a vignette, isn't it? It's almost like that shadow that goes
Yeah,
around the frame to kind of
yeah, no, for
keep
sure.
the
If I was
eyes inside.
lighter with any of this, like I just think that it wouldn't have the same effect. So we're really trying to get the focal point to pop and like just really everything falls secondary to that focal point.
Mm,
Everything. That's another rule I think that we to go back to your conversation about like composition. When you pick a point of interest that is going to be your focus in the painting, that's like the tier, like it's everything else has to be a little bit like everything has to be secondary to that.
mm,
So that's why I did what I did here to
yeah.
just bring
And
that out.
because there's only so much that I can see through the screen, how thick will you go with the, because I'm guessing it's thin for shadows and thicker for lights with your paint?
Oh, how thick of the paint you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, I generally paint pretty thin.
Mm,
And especially the shadow areas, I don't ever build up the paint in the shadow areas, but sometimes you can build up the paint in the light areas. So like right where the focal point is, I've seen artists take like a palette knife and just kind of like layer it on there. I don't do that. Like my paints are pretty thin in
mm,
general, but they are thicker in the light areas because I'm just kind of layering on the white. Like I'll just keep going on this and just add more layers on there. So, but you won't see much texture in my paintings.
even in the lights, do you think even in that spotlight, if I were there
No,
in person, would I be
I'm
able
gonna
to
look at
see?
it. It's not really.
No. Oh, it
Like
looks thin.
not really. It's
Yeah.
yeah, it's a little bit darker when it's back here, but
Yeah.
yeah, it's I work pretty thin in thin layers.
Yeah. So do you use the thinner to do that, or do you use mainly linseed oil to keep it?
I do use linseed oil. Yeah, linseed oil, unless I have a deadline and then I'm forced to use liquid. And I don't really like using liquid. I don't like how it like mixes. So yeah, ideally it's refined linseed oil. that I
Mm.
mix in with the paint.
Yeah. So I'm just getting geeky now on every element of how you do what you do,
Yeah,
because it looks lovely. Um,
thank you.
but yeah, so what's your relationship been with galleries? How's your experience been
Oh,
exhibiting your
I've
work?
learned a lot. I've been through a lot, trial and error with the galleries. And I think if I were to give one piece of advice to an artist who's starting out, I would say the first thing is that they really need to love your work in order to sell it successfully. Because if there's a gallery you want to be in and you feel like you're kind of begging them to give you a chance and they're kind of like wishy-washy about it, that's not the greatest sign, because they're salespeople. They need to really feel your work. They need to love your work to be able to sell it to the customer. The second thing is that the galleries, it's a relationship. And it's not just like you ship work off to the gallery and then they just do their job and you guys don't talk. Like this, the best gallery representations that I've had. It's a true relationship where you invest in that relationship. You talk to them. They ask you questions. Like it's just almost become friends with the gallery owners. And I mean, some of them haven't worked out for whatever reason. I think sometimes if a gallery takes on too many artists, everything is kind of like watered down, I guess. And the galleries that I'm in, they kind of limit their roster. And I found this out through trial and error. Like when you have like 100 artists in your gallery, you don't know who's who. At least that's the experience that I've had. That they just could not successfully sell my work because I'd have people come in and they'd be like, "We don't know who she is." Like that actually happened. So but they're awesome. And I'll tell you why they're awesome is because I want to spend my time painting. So if you have a great gallery and a good relationship, you paint your painting, you give them the painting, and then you can kind of get back to painting. And I'm in constant contact with my galleries. Like we're always talking, like, where's this? Where did you paint this? Like, we have a customer in here that wants this. Do you have anything like this? Like it's an ongoing kind of dialogue, a back
Mm.
and forth, and they're investing in you and you're investing in them. And I'm very happy with the galleries that I have right now. Just a
That's good.
small little.
Have you done any solo shows yourself?
I had a solo show. When I first got into landscapes, I did one solo show, and it was kind of my that was like the beginning of my career. And then sometimes my gallery will give me a feature artist show, but I not really I'm in a lot of group shows. I do a lot of group shows. I do a lot of pop-up events throughout the year, but solo not so much. And the reason for that is that I never have enough inventory to just hold 20 paintings. It's like this gallery gets a few, this gallery gets a few. I want to send some to a national show. So it kind of doesn't I don't feel that pressure that I have to hold paintings for an amount of time, but never say never. I would love to do one at some point. I just don't know when.
Yeah, no, fair enough. No, I can just imagine a gallery filled with your amazing landscape. So I just
It
wondered
would
if,
be fun. I
um,
actually look forward to that day when I can actually have a solo show somewhere.
but it can be, that can mean getting 60 paintings together, or depending on the size of the gallery, I suppose, so
Oh my God.
yeah.
You know, I don't know. I'm just so OCD about my paintings too that I have probably maybe 30 in this room, but only 10 are acceptable.
Yeah.
You make a lot of bad paintings. So when you're trying to get good at something, you have to make a lot of paintings that are less than your standard. So I have my substandard paintings are all in a pile, and I'm like, do I make them better? Do I wash them over? It's just, yeah, and that's part of my solo show is if I try to come up with 20 excellent paintings, that's going to take me years because of how I work.
Yeah. Well, I've been fortunate enough to be in there before exhibitions have been open to the public, and I've seen plenty of landscape painters still there, just touching up their painting or putting signatures on things that they forgot, So I've seen that happen several times with lots of different artists. So I understand that the pressure is right up until the deadline usually.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. But so
Yep.
do you want to name which galleries you exhibit with then? Where are they?
Yes, I'm in Valerie's Gallery in Newburyport. I'm in the Todd Bonita Gallery in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, Martin House Gallery in Blowing Rock, North Carolina, and then I have one painting in Ballard's Fine Art, and that's in Wyoming.
Oh, very nice.
And then there's a gallery I'll kind of do a show here and there in, which is the Gallery on Federal in Newburyport. And beyond that, it's just, I'll enter some national shows and which will be in a gallery. And then just shows throughout the year that are like little holiday, like a holiday show or something. But those are my four.
No, those are great. And that's two in the Midwest and two in Massachusetts, is that right?
Two, yeah. There's one in New Hampshire. The North Carolina Gallery, it's not on the coast, so it's in the mountains, kind of near Tennessee, actually.
Okay.
And then Wyoming, I'm gonna look at a map, but yeah, that's out west somewhere.
Yeah. It's one of the few
Yeah.
states I haven't been to. I've been to quite a few of the
Have
states.
you?
Yeah, in the year. But before I made art, so I didn't see the world that way when I was over
Have
there.
you been in Massachusetts?
I haven't been to Massachusetts. I'd love to go to Massachusetts. I haven't yet. No.
It is, I didn't appreciate it fully until I became an artist painting landscapes, but we live in a beautiful part of the country. So I would highly recommend it with the coastline, and there's even out in the western part of the state, there's the mountains. It's a beautiful area.
Yeah, I'll have to do it. I'll have to let my family know who are over there in the States that I'm coming for a visit and doing a road trip again and
Oh,
around. I did a big Midwest road trip last time I was there, so
oh,
we got to see a lot of different states in that trip. But sadly, Massachusetts wasn't one of them, but it will be next time, I hope.
yes.
Where should people go if they can't see your work in person? Where would you like any listeners or viewers to go to support your work and to see it online?
Oh, well, I do a lot of work in progress, my whole process, a lot of postings on Instagram. So that's Hilary Scott _fine art. And then my website is HilaryScottFineArt.com. And I have a Facebook art page, Hilary Scott Fine Art.
Oh, fantastic. Well, then I'll show that on the screen for anyone who's watching the video, and also there'll be links in the video description and in the description of wherever people are listening to the podcast. And we do recommend people go and support the artist because it's amazing, beautiful work. But I really appreciate how generous you've been with your time. It's been lovely talking to you. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, so it's been lovely meeting you and talking art. It's one of my favorite things to discuss. So thank you for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Well, we hope you enjoyed that episode. If you can support the podcast by leaving a like or a comment down below, that would really be great. But what we'd really like is if you're able to leave a review on the podcast channels, wherever you listen to it or download it, because that helps us get spread around the internet so that more people have access to us and able to see what we're making.
Also, follow us on Instagram, and we'd really appreciate it if you like and engage with our posts. Help get the podcast better known. Thanks for listening.